Okay, here's my second video. Why was music better in the 70s than it is today? I'm just picking the 70s kind of as an arbitrary point, but there's a reason for that. If someone says, what are the standards? What are the music standards of today? The songs that everyone knows, everyone loves, played at every party. It's mostly 70s music. You could make an argument that there's some stuff that came before or some 80s music and so forth. But it's that classic rock period, right? The Beatles, Skinner, Zeppelin, Doors, Hendrix, Clapton, Sabbath, Queen. These are the standards of today. And at some point we have to realize that music was made 40 to 50 years ago, in some cases over 50 years ago. And to realize why this is a problem and why this is shocking, you have to have at least a little bit of a timeline of music history. And I would say from the end of the US Civil War until the end of rock, you had one of the most explosive periods of music in the entire history of the world. Nothing had been experienced like this before. Every couple years, there wasn't just new musicians, there was entirely new genres over and over and over again coming out of the United States and other places too, of course, but the United States was a major player in that. Jazz music by itself is so mind blowing and revolutionary. It's hard to even fathom how something like that was created. Um, all the early forms of ragtime and New Orleans jazz and Dixieland, um, morphing into blues and boogie woogie and R&B, and then country styles developing too out of the churches and out of the hills and the Western territories, and bluegrass, and then the early rock and roll, and then if I were to talk about the 1950s, for instance, and you were to play me some music, I could tell you what year it probably came from. If you were to say, here's a song, I'll be like, well, that's rockabilly. That's, mid 50s or so. Or, boom, that's British Invasion. That's early 60s. Or, oh, that's 70s funk or something. If there's a piece of music from early rock that I've never heard, I can probably date it within a couple of years because there was so much rapid change happening all the time. And then you get to a point now where I don't think I could tell the difference between music made in 2001 and 2021. I really, I really don't even know the difference, to be honest. I'm not saying there aren't good bands, good musicians. Of course, there's a lot of movements that are perhaps a bit underground. But in terms of popular music that captures the attention of the whole culture, that's over. That's gone. Some would say maybe the end of rock or the end of this musical explosion maybe was in the mid 90s with grunge. Country music had kind of a resurgence after that. I'm a musician. I love music. I can't even tell you anything that happened in music in the last 30, 40 years. I really could almost care less. I've been accused of being married to the 70s and, just having some kind of weird nostalgia, but I'm not alone on this. A lot of folks feel this way. You can go on YouTube and people are debating details of conversations that happened in the 70s between music and producers and when this musician met that musician. And that's like 50 years ago, folks. And like, I couldn't even tell you what happened between 1995 and 2015 in the music industry. There's some good bands, some good names, but we lost something really big. And whether this was simply a cultural inertia that just, some kind of entropy where it all wound down, whether the music industry killed it, whether digital media, artists couldn't keep up with the new forms of buying and selling music. I don't know the answer. Maybe DJs killed it because you don't need live bands anymore, and there's no way to groom new musicians. Nobody can make a living playing weddings while they're refining their craft. It's either all or nothing. You either make it big or you don't. There's a lot of reasons, and that probably deserves its own video. But I'm going to share what I've found over the years, and some of it through personal experience. One of the reason, and it's very obvious, it's kind of simple when you think of it. One of the reason the music of today is not as good as the music of, let's say, the 70s is because we don't make it the same way with the same attitudes. And this, I think, is we're thinking about the wrong things. Let me give you some examples from my own personal experience too, and things that I've noticed over the years. But we think about this music of the 70s, this classic rock period, if this is really our ideal, if this produced the music that we love today, I think we should be very serious about the kind of environment that existed back then, the kind of attitude people have to music, and think that maybe we lost something along the way that was really essential, an essential environment that artists need to reach that level of creativity. So here are the things that I've come up with. I'm going to mention a little bit about some of my experiences in bands, and I've been in bands, sometimes as a keyboard player and sometimes as guitarist and so forth. I've been told I'm too dour-faced in so many words. Come on, Frank, why don't you jump around, express yourself, feel the movement of the music, put on a show our audience wants to see. If they don't see that you're excited, how can they be excited? And I'm just here shaking my head thinking, you don't get it. Music is about being genuine. There are legions of people out there who are fans of folks like John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin. Not in spite of the fact that he didn't express a lot, but because of the fact that he didn't do a lot of that stuff. Out of all the members of Zeppelin, he was the most physically reserved in his expressive movements. There are certainly times he jammed around and moved around, all that. But certainly was less than, let's say, Bonzo, who was, very expressive on the drums, moving himself around. But the main thing is, he was true to himself. They all were true to themselves, at least as far as I can tell. And that's the point. See, because it doesn't matter if you move your body a lot. It doesn't matter if you don't move your body a lot. The main thing is, are you being true to yourself? Because if there was any message that people took from rock and roll, it was the truth. Be true to who you are. Who you are is beautiful. Be you as you are. Don't be what society tells you. Don't be what the music machine tells you. Break free of all those boxes and integrate your body, mind, and soul as one beautiful, holistic entity. If that means you want to move, move. If that means you don't. But do you. If I'm in some 70s cover band and people tell me to jump around like a pogo stick, I'm like, are you not watching and listening to these very 70s bands that you like? Ronnie Van Zant of Lynyrd Skynyrd is often called one of the greatest frontmen in the history of rock. Certainly Skynyrd fans will say that, and I think others would certainly at least say he was a contender. The guy never moved. He stood on stage, cold as ice, just staring straight ahead. He didn't move. He didn't jump around. He didn't screech like a maniac. Not that those things are bad. It's just that he was true to who he was. He was putting on a show, I'm sure, to some extent. He had a shtick. I don't know him much about Skynyrd that much. But he was simply true to himself. Tremendous stage presence. But it was because he was true to himself. So be true to who you are. I mean, today people argue and laugh. Eric Clapton looks like a tax accountant. He looks and dresses like one. But that's funny. We laugh. We're laughing with him. It's not a negative thing. John Paul Jones of Zeppelin was shadowy and reserved. Ronnie Van Zant, he just stood like a predator, like a crouched tiger, ready to pounce on some prey that passes by him. Billy Joel had that New Yorker attitude, but really no discernible style that I've been able to tell. Uh, and when we talk about these things, we celebrate these people that we love and the music that we love. And these aren't negatives. This is just part of the charm of who they are. That's just who they are. And that's why we like them. Now, after the 70s, you had a generation of people who called themselves hair bands. And why did they call themselves hair bands? Because they made themselves easy to categorize. They all had to have the same hair, the same outfits, same kind of guitars, the same movements on stage. They all looked alike and sound alike. And some of their music was good, and some of their music was really going downhill because they had lost that core connection to why rock was so good in the first place. Look at these bands from the 70s, you know. They all look different. Like, I've been in bands that say, well, we all will have to wear black on stage because we're doing classic rock. But look at these classic rock bands. They didn't wear black on stage. Some did, some didn't. Sometimes it didn't look like bands had a discernible dress code at all. One member's wearing white, one member's wearing flowers, one member's in black. One of my favorite videos is watching a Black Sabbath show where there's a rainbow backdrop and carnation flowers and all the microphone stands, and none of the band are in black. They're whether they just did that, you know, because they had to book a certain gig and maybe they regret it. But I think it tells a wonderful story that it just doesn't matter how you're dressed. And, you know, our perception of what it was like is so different than maybe what the reality is. Back to my experiences in bands as a keyboard player playing 70s music, I've been told sometimes that my keyboard sounds are, quote, too churchy. And the first question is, have you actually listened to 70s music? 70s organ sounds were churchy. They were moody. They were spooky. They were mysterious. That was why it was so interesting. It was a stunning contrast to the loud, distorted guitars. Now, when people think of that great 70s rock keyboard sound, the first thing we think of is that Hammond B3 organ going through the Leslie speakers with that, you know, frothing, loud, you know, swelling organ sound. And that's a fine sound on occasion. To be honest, it's not my favorite sound. I don't really like that much anymore as far as organ sounds. I like all the different layers and shadows and moods that keyboards can provide, and that loud, foaming Hammond B3 organ. I don't know. I get tired of it after a while. It's fun for a little while, and then I get tired of it. You know, I don't. There are some people out there that have that condition where when they hear music, they sort of they claim to see and experience color. That different musicians play in different color. I don't have that, at least not in any literal way. But in a way, I kind of feel it when I hear instruments play. I feel a color, and I would draw a color if you told me to, even though I don't see it. And when I hear a Hammond B3 organ coming through a Leslie speaker, I don't see any color. I just see gray. I guess gray is a color. And then gray is okay from time to time as a color. Probably my least favorite color. I almost don't think of it as a color. And when I hear organ sounds of different types, I see lots of color. Ray Manzarek would be a good example of this. I think there are some Doors recordings where he uses a Hammond B3, maybe, on some of their later recordings, but for the most part he didn't. He avoided that. And that was a little bit countercultural, even for that day, to have these, you know, cheesy carnivalesque organ sounds. But it made sense for him. His sounds always had so much color, so much rich color. I couldn't imagine Light My Fire being done on a Hammond B3 organ. It would just be a muddy wash. It wouldn't have made sense for his playing style. And other people playing the organs he played might sound cheesy and childish, but he was able to make it sound what he wanted to. And that's something to keep in mind too, is that when these musicians in the 70s did some of these things, when they used churchy organ sounds or cheesy organ sounds, or didn't dress a certain way or move around on stage a little bit, they faced resistance back then too. I mean, today we could say they're heroes, look what they did. But they often had to be countercultural even at that time, because some of these standards of having to look and act a certain way to be on stage or on TV, those did exist back then. But at least there was an underground movement of people willing to stay true to their artistic integrity, and over time it's paid off. A lot of these bands today that we think of as the classic rock era were not necessarily charting at the time. But today we think of their music as wonderful. So it, in the long run, it's paid off. So bands then you had to be brave. Even back then, you had to be brave and just give the middle finger and say, "I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to be true to who I am." And the ones that did, it did pay off. So, in closing, those are just the kind of thoughts to say, be true to who you are. And if you're connected to an artistic vision, stay true to that vision, and hopefully it would pay off in time. But I think we're chasing the wrong things today. We're valuing the wrong things. And then we're not happy with the results we're getting, but we're not letting musicians do the kind of things that produce the music that we would really love. And I think this was always true. I think musicians have always, and artists have always had to fight up against their patrons and the industry to do things their way, because the industry is always pursuing short-term dollars, or doesn't always know what the people really want or need. And the artists are led by a vision and have to fight for that vision. But something has happened recently where it must just be too impossible to fight and win. Like in the 70s, it was hard to fight up against the music establishment, but you could fight and win. Today, it doesn't seem like that's possible anymore. You simply get ground up too soon. And if we love this music from the 70s and the early rock, we should let artists do the kinds of things that they did back then to create this music.